Sometimes you come across a single verse in the Qur'an that just stops you in your tracks. There's one in Surah Al-Aʿrāf that does exactly that. It's a real puzzle, and it forces us to grapple with some of the heaviest questions out there, right? Like, where does God's absolute power stop and our free will kick in? How can you have divine justice and predestination at the same time? So let's try to unpack this.
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. We'll break it down into 6 parts. First, we've got to nail down what the central problem really is. Then, we'll dive into the whole idea of angels and sin, to get a handle on what perfect obedience even looks like. After that, I'm going to introduce you to a really key concept, the difference between what's called takwini and tashri'i orders. Trust me, this framework is going to be our key to unlocking the whole Iblis situation. And from there, we'll get right to the heart of it all. How does God's guidance and misguidance actually work? And, what's our role in all of this? Where does our own responsibility lie?
All right, let's jump right in with the big one, the core theological question here. It's this paradox that sits right at the heart of the verse. Think about it. On one hand, you have this idea of an all-powerful God, right? His will is absolute. But then on the other hand, a core part of faith, and just ethics in general, is that we are responsible for what we do. So how can both of those things be true? It feels like they clash, and this specific verse brings that tension right to the surface.
So here's the verse itself. This is the line that kicks everything off. A party he guided, and a party on whom error was justly decreed. Now that last phrase, on whom error was justly decreed, that is everything. The Arabic here, haqqa alayhim, is really potent. It's not just saying, well, error happened to them. No, it implies something that's been settled, confirmed, even justified. It's like saying this outcome became a necessary, binding consequence. And that right there is where the whole puzzle really starts.
And that line immediately throws up the question that people have been wrestling with for ages, right? If God decrees that someone is going to be in error, how is it fair to then hold them responsible for it? It just feels like a total paradox. How do you make divine predetermination and human free will fit together? Is God's decree the thing that causes someone to go wrong, or is it more like a stamp of approval on a choice they've already made themselves? That's the nub of it.
The source material we're looking at is really systematic about this. It breaks this massive problem down into 2 main questions. So that's how we're going to approach it. The first question is all about the nature of creation itself. We're going to look at the perfect, unwavering obedience of angels and contrast that with, the most famous act of disobedience ever, Iblis. The second question goes straight for the jugular, on agency. It asks, okay, how can we say that guidance and misguidance both come from God, but at the same time, we humans are still responsible for our actions?
So, to get started on that first question, we need to set a kind of baseline. Before you can even begin to understand why someone might disobey, you've got to understand what it means to be literally incapable of disobeying. And that, of course, brings us straight to the angels. The text really digs into this idea of angelic infallibility, or isma, and it asks a fascinating question. Are angels just robots? Are they programmed for obedience with literally no capacity to do otherwise? Or is it something more refined? Is it a state of perfected will, where maybe they have a choice, but they are so perfectly aligned with God's will that they always choose the right thing? Getting this distinction right is absolutely crucial if we want to understand the different kinds of beings we're talking about here. Okay, so before we go any further, we need to define this key term, isma. Now, this word means a lot more than just sinless. It really gets at the idea of a special kind of divine protection, a preservation from making mistakes or disobeying. It's not just a behavior, it's an inherent quality. It's a state of being that's so deeply ingrained that it makes disobeying God's commands literally impossible.
And this is where you see the huge gap between what it means to be an angel and what it means to be human. See, angels aren't just good souls floating around. Their whole makeup is different from ours. They don't have that internal tug-of-war between desires and reason that we struggle with every single day. They're not tempted by ego. They're not tempted by greed. So when an angel obeys, it's not like they've won some great moral victory over temptation. It's just what they do. It's the flawless execution of their purpose, as natural as the sun giving off light.
All right, now we're getting to the absolute core of the argument. The key that unlocks this entire puzzle is a distinction the source makes between 2 different systems, 2 fundamental orders that God uses to run creation. Seriously, if you get this next part, the whole verse starts to make sense. Okay, first up is what's called the nizam-e takwini, or the creational order. The easiest way to think about this is like the laws of nature, or physics.
It's the divine command that makes something what it is. God commands the sun to shine, and it shines. It has no choice. He commands fire to be hot, and it's hot. This isn't a suggestion, it's a command that's woven into the very fabric of that thing's existence. Obedience is automatic.
Then you've got the second system, the Nizami Tashri'i, or the legislative order. Now this one is different. Think of it as the system of law. This system only applies to beings who were created with free will, and that means us humans and the jinn. The commands here aren't baked into our nature. They're guidelines, laws, things like you should pray or you shouldn't steal. The whole point of this system is that disobedience is possible. That choice is what makes the concepts of reward and punishment have any meaning at all.
And this is where it all clicks. The angels, they operate under that first system, the Takwini order. Just like the sun, obedience is basically in their spiritual DNA. But us, humans and jinn, we're living in the second system, the Tashri'i order. We're the ones given the laws and the freedom to follow them, or not. Our entire existence is the realm of the test. And understanding that one distinction, it honestly changes everything.
So now that we have this powerful framework, the two orders, Takwini and Tashri'i, we can finally go back and solve that first big puzzle we talked about, the whole problem of Iblis.
Because this is the contradiction that trips so many people up, right? If we just establish that angels are infallible, that they're part of this system of guaranteed obedience, then what about Iblis? His refusal to prostrate before Adam seems like a massive, glaring exception. So what happened? Did one angel just glitch? Did he somehow break the fundamental laws of his own being?
Well, the Qur'an itself gives us the answer loud and clear. The source points us to another chapter, Surah Al-Kahf, where the text just comes right out and tells us where Iblis came from. And it turns out he wasn't actually an angel by nature at all.
And there it is. The whole theological problem was based on a misunderstanding, a flawed premise. Iblis was with the angels, he was in their midst, worshiping right alongside them, but he wasn't one of them. The Quran says he was from the jinn. And what do we know about the jinn? They have free will. They operate under that second system, the Tashri'i order. So his ability to disobey wasn't an anomaly, it was built into his very nature, just like the angels' inability to disobey was built into theirs. And just like that, the contradiction completely disappears.
Okay, so with the Iblis question sorted, we can now circle back to the second and, maybe even tougher, part of that verse in Al-Aʿrāf, the whole idea of a divine decree of error. Now that we have this framework of choice, how in the world are we supposed to understand a phrase like, a party on whom error was justly decreed? The text points out something brilliant here. The answer is actually in the verse itself. You just have to keep reading. See, it doesn't just say, and boom, error was decreed upon them. It immediately tells you why. The very next part says, indeed, they had taken the devils as allies instead of a law. So this really forces the question, doesn't it? Is this decree something that happens right at the beginning? Is it an arbitrary act by God that just seals someone's fate before they've even done anything? Or is it a reaction? Is it a consequence that follows a choice the person has already made for themselves?
And the source lays out the sequence perfectly. And honestly, this is probably the single most important takeaway from this whole analysis. The divine decree isn't the cause of them going astray. It's the consequence. Look at the steps. Step 1, a person makes a free choice. They choose to take devils as allies instead of God. Then comes step 2, a kind of self-delusion kicks in, where they start to believe that their wrong path is actually the right one. It's only after those 2 steps that step 3 happens. The divine decree comes down and basically confirms the state that they have already chosen for themselves.
So what this decree of misguidance really means is not that God is actively shoving someone off a cliff. It's more like God is withdrawing his safety rope of special grace and support from someone who has already walked right up to the edge of that cliff on their own, looked down, and decided they like what they see. He's simply allowing the natural consequences of their own choices, their own allegiances, to play out.
And all of this brings us to the final conclusion, the big picture. Once you separate those 2 orders, the Takwini and the Tashri'a, and once you understand that the divine decree is a consequence, not a cause, the meaning of the verse becomes crystal clear. And what it does, ultimately, is put the responsibility squarely on our shoulders.
So, here's the bottom line. The whole system we live in, this Tashri'i order, is designed around choice. That's its purpose. Guidance is out there. It's offered to everyone. But if a person makes the choice to reject it, to turn away and align themselves with something else, well,
the natural result is that their path becomes sealed. That decree isn't God making the first move. It's the final move in a game we started. And the responsibility for how that game ends, that's entirely on us.
And after breaking all that down, we're left with this one kind of unsettling thought. The verse isn't just about people who knowingly choose to do bad things. It specifically mentions those who are lost while they think they're guided. And that just completely shifts this from being some abstract theological argument to something intensely personal. The biggest question this verse leaves us with isn't about God's decree. It's about our own capacity for self-deception. It forces us to ask a much harder question than, am I making the right choices? It forces us to ask, how can I be sure?